Welcome back. Jordan's parliament has voted to repeal a controversial clause in a law that spares a rapist from punishment if the rapist marries his victim and stays married for at least 3 years. Now, the law originates from a 1911 Ottoman legal code. 8 other Arab states have similar laws, but many have been facing growing pressure for reform. Both Lebanon and Bahrain have made movements to repeal their laws, but the appeals are still going through the legislative process. And to discuss this, we're joined by Tara Kungarlu. She's a journalist focusing on the Middle East and founder of Art of Hope. Tara, thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having me, Michelle.
So, according to this law, if a rapist marries a woman he raped, he doesn't get punishment.
Exactly. And in a way, he gets away with that crime by taking away this shame by marrying this victim. And in a lot of cases, the family wants that. The family of this girl wants to preserve the honor by forcing this girl who's victimized into marriage.
And we saw a case in Morocco in 2014. A 16-year-old girl committed suicide after being raped and then forced to marry the rapist. How much of a legal pressure is there for the girl to then marry the rapist?
A lot of these events take place in rural areas and in the villages. If you look at the cases one by one and closely, one in Lebanon in particular happened to a 22-year-old girl who was forced to marry the rapist. And one night, while married, this man came and shot the girl. And that poses the question that how much trust do these families have in the authorities?
Right.
Because in many cases, the families don't even report the case. They don't report the rape because, again, it goes back to the culture that exists in particular in that part of the world that is there to preserve the honor. And then it goes back to the issue of honor killing, which again exists in many of these countries still.
Now Jordan has made some progress here with regards to repealing this law. But it is, to your point, part of the whole honor killing code. And there is still a law in Jordan that I think they're working on repealing, that if the killing was done due to rage at the fact of being dishonored, that there's a lesser sentence. That's been passed by the lower parliament, likely to get passed by the higher parliament?
It's interesting because whether it's the parliament or the government at large, there are a lot of differences of opinion. I was reading on this and talking to a few friends and colleagues in Jordan, and the first female coroner in Jordan, believe it or not, was in support of this law. So if a female officer and government official in a way is supportive of this, you can imagine what other masses who are not necessarily educated in a large country would support. And a lot of this goes back, again, whether it's Jordan, Morocco, Tunisia, or the Gulf countries, to the lack of education and the embedded culture of abuse toward women in these countries.
And this is absolutely horrific. It is still applicable in 8 other countries. Which countries are those?
Believe it or not, in the Philippines, which is a majority Catholic country, it still exists. Up until 1994, France had a loophole that allowed some sort of...
France? Was this under a Sharia law loophole?
Not, again, Sharia law is applicable in certain Muslim countries. Philippines, majority Catholic country. France, because these are loopholes that exist, not necessarily a law. And then you have Latin American countries that have something similar as such. But in the Middle East right now, Libya, Palestinian territories, Kuwait, and also Tajikistan have the same loophole, which again, one by one, we're seeing people coming up in arms and protesting against it. Lebanon would most likely be the next country to work on this.
And Tara, Tunisia very recently revoked the Marry the Rapist law. Tunisia currently sits on the United Nations Human Rights Council, was sitting on the United Nations Human Rights Council for several years whilst having the Marry the Rapist law. How do you explain that the champions for human rights are committing these atrocities in their countries.
Exactly. And to your point, Tunisia actually has one of the highest rates in violation against women. And I think one by one, because these cases are coming to the forefront of public, they are being repealed. But again, you have countries like Saudi Arabia that are not necessarily pioneers of human rights celebration and
well, not on the contrary. On the contrary,
right,
Saudi Arabia, women aren't allowed to leave the house unaccompanied by a male.
But they also sit on that council.
They're on the Women's Rights Council. So what legitimacy do these organizations have where countries like Tunisia, up until a week ago, allowed the rapist to marry the rape victim, and Saudi Arabia, which, as we know, commits atrocities against women, sits on the Women's Rights Council?
I think that's a question for bureaucratical institutions, and also very much has to do with politics. Look at the Gulf. Bahrain repealed it. Kuwait still has it. So these are moments in time and in the international community where countries can really show what they are all about.
Small steps, but hopefully steps in the right direction. Tara Kungarlu, thank you. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Still to come, why the White House could declare an emergency to try and combat a growing epidemic. Details from a new report coming up next.